What if I told you that Neanderthals never really disappeared? Did you know that right now, at this very moment, as you watch this video, there is a part of them alive inside your own body? It sounds crazy, but wait. Because this story is much stranger and much closer to you than any school textbook has ever told you. For decades, we've learned a simplistic version. Neanderthals were brutish, primitive and incapable of competing with Homo sapiens. They lost the evolutionary race and disappeared. End of story, but that version is wrong, or at least incomplete. And what science has discovered in recent years completely changes that narrative. Before we continue, if you enjoy mysteries from human history and science that challenge what we learned in school, subscribe to the channel now. That way you won't miss the next videos, which will show you stories that seem like fiction but are real. Now, let's get straight to the point that nobody tells you. Neanderthals weren't what you think. Forget the caveman shuffling his feet, grunting, incapable of thinking. That image is practically a 19th century invention. Neanderthals had brains the same size as ours. In some cases even larger. They buried their dead. Some researchers believe they placed flowers on the bodies. That's ritual. That's symbolism. That's something that goes far beyond instinct. They crafted complex tools, tailored to different functions: hunting, cutting, scraping hides to protect themselves from the extreme cold of the Ice Age. And here's something few people know. Evidence has been found that Neanderthals used pigments, probably to paint their own bodies. This suggests symbolic language. It suggests identity. It suggests culture. Wait, culture? In a species we've called primitive for so long. If Neanderthals were so capable, so adaptable, so intelligent, why aren't they here anymore? This question is where the real story begins. And it's far more complex and far more disturbing than any simple explanation you've ever heard. Because the answer doesn't lie in a single cause. It lies in a combination of factors that science is still trying to fully understand. And it all begins when two different human species meet, face to face for the first time somewhere in Europe or the Middle East, tens of thousands of years ago. What happened at that meeting? Was it war? Was it coexistence? Was it something else? Imagine the scene. You're Homo sapiens, arriving in a new territory, coming from Africa, crossing icy plains, and suddenly on the horizon you see another figure. Erect, strong, looking back at you. It's not an animal. It's almost you, but not quite. This encounter happened, not just once, several times over thousands of years, in different regions of Europe and Asia. And the first big question that scientists tried to answer was, did they compete for the same resources? The answer seems to be yes, at least in part. Neanderthals and Homo sapiens hunted the same animals. They sought the same shelters. They competed for the same territories rich in food, water, and protection from the cold. And when two intelligent groups compete for the same space, something has to give. But here's the problem. If that were all, why did only one of the species disappear? Some researchers point to a subtle, almost invisible advantage that Homo sapiens may have had. Larger social networks. Groups that were more interconnected, capable of exchanging information, techniques, and even genes with other distant groups. Neanderthals, on the other hand, appear to have lived in smaller groups, more isolated, more vulnerable. And this leads us to the second hypothesis, perhaps the quietest and most deadly of all. Could it be that they simply weren't numerous enough to survive? Studies of ancient DNA suggest that the total Neanderthal population throughout their existence may have been surprisingly small, perhaps only a few thousand individuals scattered across Europe and Asia. Small groups face a silent genetic problem: inbreeding. Less genetic diversity means less resistance to disease and less ability to adapt to abrupt changes. And abrupt changes are exactly what happened. The Ice Age climate was unstable. Periods of extreme cold alternated with brief, milder spells. Entire ecosystems collapsed and reorganized themselves within centuries. Could climate alone have been capable of eliminating a species that had survived tens of thousands of years of brutal winters? It seems unlikely. Neanderthals had faced the ice before, and they won. So what changed this time? The answer may lie in something that neither cold nor hunger nor war could explain on their own. Something invisible. Something traveling along with the enemy. Or the neighbor: illnesses. When Homo sapiens arrived in Europe from Africa, they brought not only tools and ideas, but also microorganisms, viruses and bacteria, to which they had already developed some resistance over generations. Neanderthals, isolated for hundreds of thousands of years, had never come into contact with these pathogens. Imagine the impact of that. A small genetically undiverse group being exposed to completely new diseases, for which the body had no prepared defense. This has happened before in history, on a frighteningly similar scale. When Europeans arrived in the Americas, diseases like smallpox decimated entire populations that had never encountered those viruses before. It wasn't weapons that killed most of them. It was the invisible microbes. Does the same logic apply to Neanderthals? Science isn't absolutely certain yet, but it's a hypothesis that's being taken very seriously. And if we put everything together so far, competition for resources, small populations, climate instability, possible exposure to new diseases, we begin to see not a single cause but a perfect storm, several weak factors adding up until they become fatal. But the most intriguing piece of this story is still missing, the one that changes everything you thought you knew. Before we continue, leave a comment below. Did you already know that Neanderthals were so intelligent? And also leave a like. It really helps the video reach more people who also need to hear this story, because now we've arrived at the most impressive part of all this. The part that transforms this documentary from a story about extinction into a story about continuity. Because Homo sapiens and Neanderthals didn't just compete. They didn't just fight over territory. They also reproduced among themselves. Yes, you heard right. At some point, somewhere in Europe or the Middle East, modern humans and Neanderthals had children together. And those children survived. And they had other children. And so generation after generation, an invisible genetic thread ran through tens of thousands of years, until I got here. Until I got to you. Because if you have non-African ancestry, there's a real chance that between 1 and 2% of your DNA comes directly from Neanderthals. Pause for a second and let this hit you. A species that supposedly disappeared may at this very moment be helping to shape who you are. But what exactly is this Neanderthal DNA doing inside you? And why does this completely change how we should understand this extinction? Scientists have discovered that these fragments of Neanderthal DNA, still present in us, are not just random remnants. They do things. Some studies link Neanderthal genes to how our immune system responds to certain infections. Others link these genes to skin and hair characteristics, adaptations that helped early humans survive in the cold climates of Europe. There is even research linking Neanderthal genetic variants to how we feel pain, how we regulate sleep, and even our susceptibility to certain modern diseases. Think about it. A species that walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago, that faced glaciers, hunted mammoths, painted its own body, is still in a way influencing how your body functions today. This changes everything, doesn't it? Because if part of their genetic code survives within us, can we really say that Neanderthals disappeared? Or could it be that in fact they were absorbed, diluted within a new hybrid species, which we call Homo sapiens, but which is actually a mosaic of various human lineages that once walked side by side? Science still doesn't have a definitive closed answer, and perhaps it never will. Because the extinction of the Neanderthals was probably not a single event with a clear cause and an exact moment. It was a slow process, silent, made up of small losses, genetic crossbreeding, harsh winters, nameless diseases, and ever-shrinking populations, gradually mixing with a larger, more numerous, more connected group us. There was no final war. There was no last lone Neanderthal watching the end of his species from atop a mountain, as movies like to imagine. There was, most likely, a gradual disappearance, almost invisible, where the line between them and us became increasingly blurred, until it practically vanished. And perhaps that's exactly why this story fascinates us so much, because it doesn't just talk about an extinct species. It talks about us, on how identity, survival, and belonging are far more fluid concepts than we like to admit. Neanderthals were no less human. They were another form of human being. And perhaps in the end, that boundary we created between them and us was never as solid as we thought. So, the next time you look in the mirror, it's worth remembering perhaps Neanderthals didn't disappear. Perhaps somehow A part of them is still right here, alive, inside you. If this story got you thinking, leave a like and comment below. Did you know you carry Neanderthal DNA? And since you've made it this far, you'll definitely enjoy the video that's playing on the screen now. Watch it next, because this story continues and gets even more surprising.